Not that either of them knew exactly how telephone cables should be installed, but they were both well versed in keeping an eye on whippersnappers like this one, to stop them pulling a fast one. That was all there was to it. Sometimes the two couples had dinner together, insofar as one could have dinner, when Ove and Rune mostly just stood about in the parking area the whole evening, kicking the tires of their cars and comparing their load capacity, turning radius, and other significant matters. And that was all there was to it. Sonia and Anita's bellies kept growing steadily, which, according to Rune, made Anita doolally in the brain. Apparently, he had to look for the coffee pot in the fridge more or less daily once she was in her third month. Sonia, not to be outdone, developed a temper that could flare up quicker than a pair of saloon doors in a John Wayne film, which made Ove reluctant to open his mouth at all. This, of course, gave further cause for irritation. When she wasn't breaking out in a sweet sweat, she was freezing, and as soon as Ove tired of arguing with her and agreed to turn up the radiators by a half step, she started sweating again, and he had to run round and turn them back down again. She also ate bananas in such quantities that the people at the supermarket must have thought Ove had started a zoo. The hormones are on the warpath, Rune said with an insightful nod during one of the nights when he and Ove sat in the outside space behind his house, while the women kept to Sonia and Ove's kitchen, talking about whatever it is women talk about. Rune told him that he had found Anita crying her eyes out by the radio the day before, for no other reason than that it was a nice song. "A nice song?" said Ove, perplexed. "A nice song," Rune answered. The two men shook their heads in mutual disbelief and stared out into the darkness, sat in silence. "The grass needs cutting," said Rune at last. "I bought new blades for the mower." Ove nodded. "How much did you pay for them?" And so their friendship went on. In the evenings, Sonia played music for her belly because she said it made the child move. Ove mostly just sat in his armchair on the other side of the room and pretended to be watching television while she wasn't doing it. In his innermost thoughts, he was worried about what it would be like once the child finally decided to come out. What if, for example, the kid disliked Ove because Ove wasn't so fond of music? It's not that Ove was afraid. He just didn't know how to prepare himself for fatherhood. He had asked for some sort of manual, but Sonia had just laughed at him. Ove didn't understand why. There were manuals for everything else. He was doubtful about whether he'd be any good at being someone's dad. He didn't like children an awful lot. He hadn't even been very good at being a child. Sonia thought he should talk to Rune about it because they were in the same situation. Ove couldn't quite understand what she meant by that. Rune was not in fact going to be the father of Ove's child, but an altogether different one. At least Rune agreed with Ove about the point of not having much to discuss, and that was something. So when Anita came over in the evenings and sat in the kitchen with Sonia, talking about the aches and pains and all those things, Ove and Rune made the excuse of having things to talk about and went out to Ove's shed and just stood there in silence, picking at various bits on Ove's workbench. Standing there next to each other with a closed door for a third night on the trot without knowing what they were supposed to do with themselves, they agreed that they needed to get busy with something before, as Rune put it, the new neighbors start thinking there's some sort of monkey business going on in here. Ove agreed that it might be best to do as he said. And so it was. They didn't talk much while they were doing it, but they helped each other with the drawings and measuring the angles and ensuring that the corners were straight and properly done. And late one evening, when Anita and Sonia were in the 4th month, 2 light blue cots were installed in the prepared nurseries of their terraced houses. We can rub it down and repaint it pink if we get a girl, mumbled Ove when he showed it to Sonia. Sonia put her arms around him, and he felt his neck getting all wet with her tears. Completely irrational hormones. I want you to ask me to be your wife, she whispered, and so it was. They married in the town hall, very simply. Neither of them had any family, so only Rune and Anita came. Sonia and Ove put on their rings, and then all 4 of them went to the restaurant. Ove paid, but Rune helped check the bill to make sure it had been done properly. Of course it hadn't. So after conferring with the waiter for about an hour, the 2 men managed to convince him it would be easier for him if he halved the bill or they'd report him. Obviously, it was a bit hazy exactly who would report who for that. But eventually, with a certain amount of swearing and arm-waving, the waiter gave up and went into the kitchen and wrote them a new bill. In the meantime, Rune and Ove nodded grimly at one another without noticing that their wives, as usual, had taken a taxi home 20 minutes earlier. Ove nods to himself as he sits there in the sun looking at Rune's garage door. He can't remember when he last saw it open. He turns off the headlights of the Saab, gives the cat a poke to wake it up, and gets out. Ove? Says a curious, unfamiliar voice. Suddenly an unknown woman, clearly the owner of the unfamiliar voice, has stuck her head into the garage. She's about 45, wearing tatty jeans and a green wind cheater jacket that looks too large for her. She doesn't have any makeup on, and her hair is in a ponytail. The woman blunders into his garage and looks around with interest. The cat steps forward and gives her a threatening hiss. She stops. Ove puts his hands in his pockets. Ove? She bursts out again, in that exaggerated, chummy way of people who want to sell you something, while pretending it's very last thing on their mind. I don't want anything, says Ove, nodding at the garage door, a clear gesture that she needn't father about finding another door. It'll be just fine, as she walks out the same way that she came. She looks utterly unchastened by that. My name is Lena. I'm a journalist at the local newspaper. And well, she begins and then offers her hand. Ove looks at her hand and looks at her. I don't want anything, he says again. What? I suppose you are selling subscriptions, but I don't want one. She looks puzzled. Right. Well, actually, I'm not selling the paper. I write for it. I'm a journalist. She repeats slowly, as if there were something wrong with him. I still don't want anything. Ove reiterates as he starts shooting her out of the garage door. But I want to talk to you, Ove. She protests and starts trying to force herself back inside. Ove waves his hands at her as if trying to scare her away by shaking an invisible rug in front of her. You saved the man's life at the train station yesterday. I want to interview you about it. She calls out excitedly. Clearly she's about to say something else when she notices that she's lost Ove's attention. His gaze falls on something behind her. His eyes turn to slits. I'll be damned, he mumbles. Yes, I'd like to ask you. She begins sincerely, but Ove has already squeezed past her and started running towards the white Skoda that's turned up by the parking area and started driving down towards the houses.